Hi, I'm Antonio, and I decided to focus my research around degenerative groundwater depletion rates, especially that pertaining to Australia's Great Artesian Basin. Groundwater rates have been increasing exponentially in the last 20 or 30 so years, but nobody has been able to visualize that, so nobody's ever really recognized that as a problem. And whenever we do have policy or conservation efforts, it's always surrounded by lakes and rivers and such. But people don't realize that groundwater is the pillar for all that stuff, and it is a massive contributor to the ecological system throughout many regions. And in the last 20 or so years, we've developed new technology, including GRACE, this combination of satellites that's able to measure the Earth's gravitational pull and slight variations in it, use hydrological information and precipitation patterns in that area to get an accurate number of total groundwater in that area. So for the first time ever, we have mappage of this. So first of all, this is a healthy freshwater ecosystem. We have the ground storage water. This is what's depleting. This is the stock, and then it moves out the outflow to the base. And the base is essentially like a wet surface area that is able to support wetland hydration, springs, river flow, and it keeps them from just absorbing and evaporating. That creates healthy soil function, which leads to healthy infiltration. Of course, you have precipitation also contributing, and it goes to a recharge. That's the inflow into the stock. The new data sets contributed by the satellites, we've been able to actually map groundwater and levels in the last 20 years quite accurately. And what you see here is the green are groundwater dependent ecosystems, and the yellow is where groundwater is, but the ecosystem is not that dependent on it. And then directly down here, this one is the directly from the gray satellites, and the red depicts a projective drought score. And then actually you see here, this is actually the same map as above, but this is on Google Engine, same data, and notice how it overlaps. So again, quite important. Okay, so we are going to Xinjiang, China, and we are going to observe their groundwater extraction rates. Due to Grace's new satellite data, which she was implemented in 2003, Zhang Yun Hu is going to be able to document significant groundwater losses and provide us this graph. So the total water use increased from 49.4 billion to 57.7 billion metric meters, where the groundwater extraction doubled from 5.3 billion to 11.9 billion. Recharge also declined at an average of 5.5 billion. So annually, they lost about 5 to 6 billion metric meters of groundwater. And if you look here, you can notice that cultivated land also doubled. And then when you look over here, groundwater abstraction / total water use also followed that same exact trend. had already pointed out that groundwater depletion has become a major global sustainability problem in the last few decades, especially in regions heavily dependent on irrigation and agricultural industry, especially those in arid regions that really only have that groundwater to hold them over. The numbers are staggering. I mean, 70% of global freshwater withdrawals all going to the agricultural industry. 40% of irrigation water for that purpose comes from groundwater. But then the wildest number is that 60% of agricultural water is lost due to insufficient irrigation systems. So evaporation, runoff, just lazy, destructive systems that they have. So when you look at this problem as a whole, I feel like the easiest way to go about a key leverage point here is by refining irrigation efficiency with new products and new technology. Okay, so here we are with the same graph again of a healthy system, but underneath I've added human extraction and intervention. So we have human extraction, very simple, right? We start pulling groundwater out of the aquifer. We then pump that into urban use naturally and agriculture. The 70% usage of agriculture gets pumped into plenty of crop irrigation that we lose plenty of water on. And that creates an abundance of food. And that gets pushed out to the public and an economic dependency in that area grows. And we actually end up gaining more citizens and rely on higher human extraction. And it just keeps flowing and flowing until we're a major metropolis area with massive agricultural output. And this is called an agricultural extraction reinforcing loop. And then on this side, due to that, we have a reduction in ground storage because we are siphoning out so much to support our human system. And with that, we now get a reduced base flow, so the water's not as heavy underneath everything, and it's not able to hold up the infrastructure for the wetlands and springs and the lower stream flow. So now the wetlands start seeping into the ground and evaporating. We're losing that, and then we lose the vegetation and soil function in that area, and it creates ecological decline in that area, and we lose biodiversity, which is as a whole trickle down. And because the soil now lost its function, we don't get a strong infiltration and we don't get enough recharge. So not only are we siphoning, but because of our siphoning, we weaken the system and it's not able to regenerate as well as it did before. Okay, so groundwater depletion represents a system level imbalance and it ends up affecting all three levels of sustainability, or all three pillars. The environmental aspect, obviously, because you lose the wetlands and the reduced base flow, everything, obviously. Economics, because you're losing irrigation and depending more on groundwater, where food is becoming more expensive to produce and there's less security for that food output. And then equity, of course, future generations are now going to have to deal with depleted aquifers because we're greedy. And also rural downstream communities can also be disproportionately affected, as we learned in the LA River system. Okay, in contrast to China's bleak future, we have a Great Artesian Basin in Australia. This is actually a great example for implementing sustainability efforts on groundwater usage. So this is 22% of Australia's entire landmass. The thing's huge. And as Project Kushner explained to us, that in the early 1900s, there was unregulated, unlimited amount of cultivation going on in that area. And they were boring holes and draining this water for the purpose of pastoral cattle farming, domestic water supplies, and there was a lot of mining going on in the area. So the aquifer just began declining over time, and they left these boreholes, so it just continued leaking. And this led to a loss of 38% of all the natural spring systems in these wetlands by 1900s. So in response, the Australian government realized they had to do something. So first they started boring the holes, right? I mean, that's no-brainer. It's just start capping those holes and cut off the water flow, in which they ended up saving 250,000 megaliters of water every year. Okay, and then they moved to regulate and license water usage, so everybody was limited at that point. And then they passed their first environmental bill called the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act in 1999, which now protected federalized land and threatened species and so on. Okay, so I was extremely excited to come across the Great Artesian Basin-wide Condition Report in 2024. This is amazing. This is a 10-year review of how all these sustainability efforts are going, and I have it right here. So this is conducted by the Commonwealth Department of Climate Change, Energy, and Environmental and Water in Australia. So as we see, ground usage is going down, so that's a great little green trend there. Springs and groundwater are, they're starting to recover, but it's not that great yet. Social and cultural activities, it's the first report acknowledging the First Nations cultural values, and they say that social values largely measured through tourism in the basin have steadily increased over the past 10 years. So we have 3 E's coming into play here. And then when you come down here at the economic values, the industries dependent on GAB water resource contributed an estimated $33.2 billion per year to the Australian economy, and this almost tripled since 2016. So you have a full rebound of economics, equity with the social, cultural aspects, and then even the ecosystem as well. As you can see, the springs are starting to recover. Oh, and also I found this little interactive map here that isn't working.